Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I'm Brigid Burke, and today's the 26th of March, 2025. And what do we do? Our morning weather report. It's cloudy, but I think it's going to be a fairly nice day overall. It's going to be a fairly nice rest of the week. Yeah, I've been up since, I guess, a little past 5. And good morning, Suda. You're first on today. Yeah, and I think, actually, and good morning, Alex. Yeah, I think our topic this morning was going to be connected to Saturn and Saturn energy, because we had talked about that yesterday. And I had kind of promised that I would do a little bit of an update today. Now, yesterday turned out to be interesting, because yesterday was my day to try to finish grading and catch up with all that, because I had 2 sets of assignments for my religion students, and I still have myth midterms that haven't been graded yet. And I'm sure my students are waiting for those. But what ended up happening yesterday afternoon, I always walk with my sister on Tuesday mornings if the weather's good. And good morning, Joanne. Good to see you. Good to see you guys. We'd gone for a walk, and then I had an appointment with a student at 2. And she is a psych major who is graduating, and she's a religion student. Now, it's really weird because this week I've had 2 conversations with students who are around 22 years old. So they're a little older. They're not freshmen. They're not, they're not just, they're not new to the whole college experience and everything, and so on and so forth. So she's been wanting to have, she's been sending me kind of long messages and stuff. So we ended up having a 2.5-hour conversation yesterday, which, I mean, she was just kind of like, oh my God, you have so many students, I feel bad. And I'm like, I'm always willing to make the time for somebody who wants to have the conversation. If students don't care, if it's just like, yeah, I just need my grade, I just need to check this box. Okay. I'm going to give you like 2 minutes of my time, answer your question, and I'm going to move on. But if somebody says to me, no, I really want to talk about these ideas, then I'm just like, well, yeah, I'm into it, So anyway, we talked for quite a long time yesterday. And morning, Alistair, or afternoon. No, I guess it still is morning. I have to keep remembering. Incidentally, I did hear from Sam. She said that she will be back on the live stream with us after the time change in Britain, because the time change, I think, happens this coming weekend. So after that, it will be the 5-hour time difference again. I'm guessing the 11 a.m. time slot, or 11:30, doesn't necessarily work for her right now. But anyway, I know we haven't seen her on in a while, and I am thinking of her because we are thinking of Saturn, and I know she does a tremendous amount of research on Saturn. So when she comes back on, we might revive a little that discussion as well. But we had a really long and interesting conversation yesterday. I had a conversation, again, you were one of the good ones. Oh, thank you, Alex. That's very kind of you. We will see what is going on. But we had this long conversation about things. And one of the things that we talked about, because one of the things that comes up a lot with students has to do, and it actually even came up in my digital literacy class that I was teaching. There was definitely this idea that we had the students, the big question that they had for me over the last couple of days is, how do I know that I am right about something? How do I know that I am right? And I'm like, that's a loaded question. How do any of us know that we're right? Because if you're talking about academic research and so forth, you say, okay, it's like you're providing evidence, but you're providing evidence within the context of a conversation. And within that conversation, you're talking about people who are not only maybe have credentials in a field, like, have, postgraduate degrees or whatever, but people also who have experience, who have written, who have participated in the conversation, who have gotten feedback, and therefore can speak from a place not only of having, the book learning, as we would used to call it, or whether or not we have the experience. So, yeah, and how much does our experience fit in? What kind of experience fits in? But a lot of them were talking religiously. They were like, well, how do I know that my belief about God is right? That's a question that comes up a lot. And it kind of gets me into the whole This is relevant to the Saturn discussion, by the way. This is not a diversion. And so as somebody, I think she was raised Catholic. And so we were talking about Catholicism and the ways in which that creates a barrier for people. And we have talked about this past week, about the barrier that can create to being able to explore, because we kind of have this idea of, we're skeptical of the idea that, oh, if you do this or not obey our dogma, you're going to go to hell. People go, yeah, right, whatever. But there's a part of us that goes, but what if I'm wrong? What if I can't trust my intuition on this? What if I'm not right about this, right? And that's the question that a lot of students have. I'm really interested in exploring, but, I don't know. Or they'll have an experience that seems to kind of fit in the paradigm of the religion that they're in. And they'll say, okay, so do I have to believe in this religion now? I mean, this was not the only context of this conversation, but it was one of the topics that kind of came up. And it kind of got into a discussion of demonology, because this person had brought, she said she really did it just to kind of, and good morning, Kathleen. She kind of did this just to be kind of, I don't know, what's the word? Difficult, I guess, like just to be rebellious, I guess is the word. And so her parents were freaking out. But she says, I don't know. She says, after I read it, she goes, it just didn't seem quite so scary, as it had been. And I said, yeah, well, demonology is really about, it's not really about, people always talk about, I'm going to make a pact with Satan for power. And yeah, I'm sure there's people out there who try to do stuff like that. And, and to me, if you're out there doing that, all that is a reflection of what you believe that you are not. It was like Lon Milo Duquette used to say. He would say, well, if you cast a love spell because, you want Susie next door to fall in love with you, it just means that you think you're not good enough for Susie next door. You need this extra oomph to try to make you the person. And I was explaining that to her about demonology also. A lot of times, there's a really good book called Low Magic, with a K. And it is by Lon Milo Duquette. And it's an absolutely hilarious, easy to read book about his experience. At least one of the things he talks about. He also talks about exorcism, but he talks about his experience summoning a demon called Ouroboros. And it's absolutely hilarious. It's hilarious, but he demonstrates how this practice becomes a reflection. Like your need to do this act is a reflection of your own weakness. Like they tend to be a reflection of your own weakness. And if you do manage to connect, they kind of want to manipulate or exploit that weakness. So you have to be very, very careful. He said, nobody can do this kind of work unless they are a Solomon. And he's referring to the idea of the Testament of Solomon, where they have this, this is where Solomon summons the 72 demons and says, who are you? And, what angel binds you, and blah, blah, and, all that kind of stuff. But what I think a lot of people don't realize about that particular realm is that the whole purpose of the demons is that they are, they're like the Titanic forces. They are a labor force. And yes, they can be an unruly and chaotic labor force. But as I explained to her, and this is the way Lon had explained it to us, was that it's like having a bulldozer or a caterpillar machine, if you know how to drive it and how to use it, you can build something. If you don't, you can destroy a lot of shit. So, and I think that was like the best explanation I'd ever heard of the way demonology was kind of represented in the apocryphal literature, because it's the idea that you can build stuff with these forces. Okay, so what does this have to do with Saturn? Well, interestingly, I had a number of dreams last night. And weirdly, I had one dream. Some of you know who Jake Stratton Kent was. And I had a dream about him. And it was like we were talking about a copy of the Goetia, which is the book of the 72 demons and summoning them and what their sigils are and all that kind of stuff. I used to have copies of it, like reference copies just to see. And actually, I've sold them all now. They're actually all gone from the house. But it was like there was this new Goetia that was out, and it had these illustrations. It's almost like it had like a crap ton of commentary in the front, and then it had this little sliver at the end that was the actual, Goetic text. And it was like Jake was holding a copy of it, and he said, this one is so powerful, like it was actually hurting his arms. Like he's like, it's not the beginning part. He's like, the illustrations at the end are kind of the thing. And I had ordered a copy of this one, and I'm thinking, why did I order a copy of this? It's like almost like, you know, like they have in those TV shows you have about things like, oh my God, that's so interesting. You had a dream about him. Yeah, it's funny. I've also been thinking I need to I need to message his daughter. I haven't talked to her in a while, but yeah, Jake came into my mind, and because Jake was, you know, he was the expert on that text, but he was also he was just also an extraordinarily kind person also. And you know, his interest in that doesn't, you know, people have an impression of what that means, but he was one of the nicest people. And I was thinking about the fact that in Glastonbury, when they had their conference, the local vicar of the church, who was a woman, had come in to give a talk at the Glastonbury Occult Conference, and somebody stood up in the audience, started screaming at her, and was going to attack her. And Jake got up and like punched the guy out. Like, you know, they got in a fight because Jake is that's kind of the way he was. And he was just like, no, like, you know, and everyone's laughing. They're like, yeah, Jake, Mr. Goetia is actually saving the vicar. It's kind of, it was kind of funny, but he was super nice. He was a super kind person. And, you know, but if people, he would fight back if people gave him crap. But he was like holding, and he actually was almost afraid of this Goetia. And I was like, ooh, that's interesting, because Jake is not somebody I would ever see. He knows the context of everything. And so he's just like, yeah, you know. He knows what the origins are, like the origins in ancient religion of a lot of these figures. So that's where his research is really, really interesting. That's where his research intersects with mine. But Jake, so yeah, and I was thinking like, ooh, I have this book on my shelf. And the thing is, it was one of those things like they say in those paranormal shows where they're like, oh, you took out a deck of tarot cards and now your house is full of demons. And that was a topic that came up yesterday too. And I said, yeah, well, you do realize that all the companies that make those paranormal shows like A Haunting and you know, things like that, it's actually made by an evangelical Christian company, so production company. So yeah, they're there to try to scare you away. And so that does go around to the point of being scared away from believing anything outside of the dogma. You know, you have to believe the dogma. You have to, if you don't, you run the risk of being, you know, deceived by a demon from hell. And then you're, whoo, I just dropped my book there. I don't know what that means. You run the risk of being deceived. And in that deception, you're going to, you know, you're going to end up in hellfire and this and that. And that's what people are, you know, people laugh at it, but then they say, as they get closer to death, they go, ooh, you know, maybe I need to get right with God, right? I need to get right with the church. This is a problem within monotheism. I don't think it's a problem so much within other religions, but it is a monotheistic problem. Because and that's what she had said to me. Well, why is that? And I said, well, because it's one God, one truth. You know, you think, oh, there's one God, there has to be. And that's why they ask the question, who's right? Who's right? And I'm like, you are talking about the ultimate mystery. God is a metaphor for the ultimate mystery of existence. You don't know none of us knows what's right. We don't have the brain power to perceive what's right. You know, we're not, we see things in 3D. We see what's in front of us. You know, that's the realm we work in. And we're kind of aware of other things. Now, the other part of that dream, by the way, now first, okay, so I had that part of the dream. Then I started dreaming about, then Saturn kept coming into my head again. Images of Saturn and, you know, figures connected to Saturn and seeing the face of Saturn. And then I had a dream about another friend of mine, my friend Dave's wife, who is a lawyer. She's a very, really nice person. Again, very grounded, very down to earth, very, you know, but it was like she was either blind or closing her eyes. And it was another friend of mine from England well, I'm not going to mention his name because he's in I know him from one of the societies over there that it's not my business to tell people who's in and who's not in. But he was basically, it was like he had some kind of thing. It was like a game. I don't know. It was supposed to meant to look like a little castle or something. I don't know what it was. But it was like there was buttons you pushed and it was like he was explaining to her how to play this game. And I don't know if her eyes were closed or she was actually blind. But it was like she had to do things by touch. And she was like, oh, okay, this thing over here is this. And you'd be like, yes, that thing over here is this. And that when I woke up, my first thought was, yeah, this is going to be an era about seeing without your eyes. How do you play the game without looking at it, without analyzing it, without putting it right in front of your face? That's the thing that I found so interesting about this dream. And the fact that I felt like it was connected to Saturn and also to the idea of these goetic kind of forces Um, and that's, I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, are these, you know, because it's kind of a terrifying prospect, but the idea is just that these things are very, they have a power, and they are chaotic, so they're not interested necessarily in following a rule. In order to work with them, you have to be a Solomon. You know, you have to be able to confidently manage that chaos. And I remember she says to me, she says, that makes me start to wonder if I'm the kind of person who could do that. I'm like, well, you know, it's always the question. To me, I tend to not advise people to do that. Alex's mind is blown. I had a dream out myself being blind right now. Whoa. Okay. So here we have, here our synchronicity here on the live stream. Yeah. Yeah. There's the idea of learning to see without your eyes. Now, okay. So obviously, you know, people who know me know I'm going to get up in the morning, write the dreams down, and then I'm going to try to do an exploration. I mean, sometimes I bring them to the dream workshop, but I was kind of thinking about what this meant. And of course I asked Azrael, his opinion on the whole thing, and on the whole Saturn thing as well. And he kind of confirmed almost the idea that, yeah, like there's forces at work that we might see as forces that are chaotic, but they really are there to restructure and to rebuild. But this can create like this current of terror among people, because the idea is that, you know, you have these forces that are coming in, and the problem is they're unpredictable. That's what's terrifying about them. We like predictability, we like familiarity, we like normality, right? But what's happening right now is everything's kind of being torn up. Now, Saturn as a deity is often, okay, in mythology, there's the idea, I mean, again, the Romans, Saturn's an agricultural deity. In Greek mythology, where he's associated with Kronos, the god of time, Kronos is the one who was devouring his children, right? This led to the war against him as king of the universe. And then Zeus becomes king, and then you have the cult of the 12, which is the cult of the sun, and they have this whole ordering principle that comes in with that. And the Titans are confined, as Saturn is, to the lower world, to the Chthonic world, to the world underneath. And so, okay, so with with this being the case, and of course later on, as religious history, or, you know, as changes in religious thought come in, then we start to associate that underworld with a hellscape or a hellspace, which it's not necessarily. I mean, there may be forces that, yeah, are probably not safe for us to deal with, but there are forces in the world that were probably not safe for us to deal with either. So, but it's the idea that these forces, scary as they are the building blocks of the world that we're in, or they have something to do with the building of the world that we're in. So I thought the fact that kind of came up, it's kind of almost like, okay, there's powerful forces that we may find scary that seem to be at work building something. And Saturn, as we all know here, just from doing the daily live stream, Saturn seems to show up a lot in the readings. And Saturn is, I don't know, it's been on a lot of people's mind. That's why I said I probably would love to revisit this when Sam's back on, because she might have some things to say about this, because I know that's a great area of research for her, is on Saturn and Saturn energy. And I feel like, though, it's almost like, okay, there's a lot that has to do with time and the time that we're in. And we've talked about time loops and things like that. And I think we mentioned last time, I saw another video yesterday on the whole time ended in 1999, or, you know, somehow time came to a standstill in 2012, or whatever. You hear these kinds of things. And I remember having this, doing my morning Azrael meditations, communications, and he said, no, he says, I mean, yeah, he says, those are significant markers, but they are not when this started. He said this started a long time ago. You know, this started with like the Roman Empire. This is where you're stuck in a time loop. And ironically, Saturn, who we think of as the king of time, it seems almost like the Saturn energy is something designed to break us out of the time loop. Okay, that Saturn's influence, normally you would think Saturn being this kind of devouring force. Of course, you could think of him as a chaotic force that way. But Saturn is also the ruler of the golden age, right? Saturn, which people think is contradictory, but no, Saturn represents this period of time. He represents, in the Roman system, he is agriculture. He has to do with wealth. You pray to Saturn to make sure that your crops grow adequately, and that your livestock doesn't die, and all that kind of stuff. And then, you pray to be protected from Lewis Attorney, who is the one who could potentially poison your seed, right? So yeah, so you have this this idea that's going on, but you had this. There is this concept of Saturn being bound, like Saturn chained up in the underworld, kind of idea. And there have been different things about what happens when Saturn is released, right? We think there's going to be there's something destructive about it, but the way I'm kind of understanding this is that it's something that is Saturn Unbound has more to do with breaking us out of a time loop. Okay. And this is kind of the opposite of what we're told. It makes me think of what they say in Revelation, at least the Revelation that's in the Bible, about, chaining the devil up for 1,000 years or something like that, and I don't know that there's an equivalency there. I don't think Saturn is the devil, although some people, with him being a symbol of a death and a reaper, will try to mix the association in there. But Saturn Unbound, it takes us out of what we think of as an orderly system, but it's actually a system where we just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And now we're at a point where that's actually more destructive than helpful. Maybe it was never helpful, right? But now it's like, I keep getting the word como from the Enochian, which is like the window. It's the window, it's the window out. I do have things. This is my little book that fell down, so give me a moment. Okay. Okay, so I asked Azrael, I did my dream, I have my little dream diary here, and I asked him about the kind of dream that I had. And let me find where it is, because I have a lot of notes in here. Okay, here we go. So his message was, oh, I didn't write the translation of this, was it? Did I? Was Gohos, Darbs, Ohorela, Di Aziagiar, Loncho, Ial Chiafi, Fabawan, Yolsi, Balat, Babylon, Knila, Holdo, Omax, Upa'a, Drix, Uanoan. Yeah, trying to write this in half in the dark is I never turn lights on in here. I'm just weird about that. But okay, so he's saying, I say obey the law of the third harvest. Okay, and this is a phrase he brings up a lot. Obey the law of the third harvest. And I said, oh, I hate you too. Fuck off. Anyway, so obey the law of the third harvest. So it's, yeah. So what is the third harvest? Okay. This is a phrase that comes up a lot, and this has a lot to do, and he seems to tell me that it has something to do with the current eclipses, okay, and eclipse energy. But harvest to me suggests it's a reaping time, right? It's an ending. It's when something is completed. It's when we reap the fruits of something. And also, it's almost like a preparation for a new beginning. Like a new, there's this period of time that's kind of in between, and then there's this new beginning. Now, when he says Loncho Ial Chiafi Fabulan, this is calls this fall concludes the terror of poison. Okay, that's what that literally means. This fall concludes the terror of poison. So when we say Yolki ballot, so this the idea is that this is going to okay, Yolki. I think Yolki is bring. Bringing truth. There's kind of like I think has to do with anger. It's almost like through this anger of wicked blood, causing wicked blood to groan. That's kind of the phrasing, what that means there. And then Omox Upa Drix Uanoan. Know that the wings. Okay, know that the wings, that these kind of angelic forces, sometimes we'll just use the word upa for angels, like wings, bring, good morning, sorry I'm late. No worries. Hello, Kelsey. Good to have you here. Good. And yes, and we've got our mod on now, so moderator. Also just glad to have you, even not as moderator. So she's here now, so that's really good. So yeah, so there's the idea that, and okay, Uanoan is the eyes. Know that we are bringing, know that the wings bring eyes. Okay, now we can think about angels and the fact that their wings are supposed to be studded with hundreds of eyes, right? And 40,000 wings and 1 million eyes and things that our minds can't really conceive of, right? But that's not necessarily what he's referring to. And so it's interesting that both Alex and I have these dreams about people, either other people or ourselves, like not, or herself, not being able to see with the eyes. And so it's almost like there's a change that's coming that's not allowed, that's about, there's some kind of an era ending where we're not seeing so much with our eyes. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's going blind. Okay, let's not be too literal about this. But the idea that the way in which we interpret reality just with our eyes, the way in which we interpret the world, because a lot of what we see, like think about it, we get the Four of Cups a lot, right? What's one of the aspects of the Four of Cups? We're staring at the 3 cups in front of us and we don't see the one that's over here, because to see that, and it's usually coming from the same cup that's the Ace of Cups, it's the hand coming out of the cloud, right? We're not seeing it because it's not something that can be seen with the eyes. It's something that has to be seen through another mechanism. And Alex said, yeah, I'm going to have to email you about this stream or share it in the next workshop. Yeah, absolutely. Either way, whichever. Actually, I need to set that up. Fall like in autumn. Ah, good question, Suda. No, he literally means the fall, like the fall, or as in collapse. He means fall as in collapse. Yes, Longcho. Longcho has been a word that sometimes has been used for autumn, but if there's no other way to convey it, because the angelic language, at least as we know it, is quite limited. I forget exactly how many words. When I read up on the grammar of it, it's like, yeah, sometimes you have to, the way that words are, like things that are a plural or a past tense are also going to be a present tense because there's not necessarily another equivalent. And again, we only have John Dee's translations. So, okay, thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, and I don't think that's anything mysterious or scary. It's very clearly something is collapsing, no matter how you want to look at things. But because I feel like what's going on right now collectively is there's an attempt to repeat a cycle. There's an attempt to repeat a cycle here. So, and the idea is that, because I think that's what we're looking at right now, and we don't want to repeat that cycle. So the new beginning is not going to be repeating the same cycle. The new beginning is something completely other. So it's almost like, yeah, that's why we see things about you have to have strength, you have to have courage, you have to be willing to look at things differently, you have to be willing to see not with your eyes. Okay, we have this whole thing of trying to do that, and so yeah, so it's very much this kind of a thing where we're basically, and again, when we hear all this stuff, we start sitting here going, the mind starts to work, because that's naturally what we do, right? Our mind starts to go, oh, well, does it mean this? Does it mean this? What's going to happen? What time is it going to happen? Is this going to happen? Not going to happen. We kind of start trying to analyze it, right? Rather than just sitting with it. Even me just kind of standing here talking about it, but that's the way, that's a limitation that we have. I can't communicate all this to people telepathically or whatever. I suppose, I could make films or videos or images and stuff, but, my thing has always been, I'm very verbal, so that's always the way that I communicate things. And art, actually, I was thinking about that too. Art and film and things are really the way in which we break out of paradigms, because we watch images and we go into something with a certain expectation. And then if art suddenly breaks that expectation, it does something to us, right? We get, we get kind of riled up, we get uncomfortable. And then sometimes we get angry. We're like, I didn't want to be made uncomfortable, right? But sometimes if we're stuck in a thought pattern that needs to be broken or needs to be thought about differently, sometimes that has to be broken. And how it gets broken is different. Intellectual back and forth goes so far, but ultimately we may think about things and rationalize them. Think about how many times we say, oh, yes, of course I believe that, and I think that's good. It reminded me actually of the things that people will say, is that people will walk into a church and listen to a sermon, and then when they walk out, it's like they never heard the sermon. They just kind of act in the same way, right? And people say that as a criticism. I'm like, yeah, but that's what human beings do, because talking about it isn't enough to make an impact. It's like something has to happen for us to be able to break out of the paradigm. So the idea is almost like, yeah, sometimes things seem terrifying. Sometimes things seem like a calamity. But the idea is to shake you out of complacency. The idea is, we got the Grand Cross card a lot, right? This is not about being, we need to not be complacent. Now, the Saturn energy, okay, back to that. Why is Saturn coming up so strongly right now for everything? And it's, what you call it? Interesting. The blindfold is off. Yeah, exactly. Saturn in Aries. Okay, so what is Saturn energy about? Again, if we think about traditional astrology, Saturn can be about established authority, linking back to the dream. Yes. Yeah, or it's on. You could look at it either way. It's off or it's on. Or it's like you're learning to see a new way because you're not looking at it through the eyes. It's interesting. The idea here is that, how do I want to put it? That we have this, okay, so you have the Saturn energy. Saturn is about authority. It's 10th house, right? It's about authority. It's about public facing. When you have strong 10th house energy or strong Capricorn type of thing, it's about frequently people who have that kind of, if Saturn is actually in the 10th house, it could be like, okay, you're going to be a politician, or you're going to be a government figure, or you're going to be in the military or something. Or isn't it like the irony of the blind suits there? Yes, yes, exactly. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. The idea that the prophet is always blind. Certainly in Greek mythology, we see this. Tiresias is the great prophet. He loses his eyesight, right? And then Zeus gives him the gift of prophecy as compensation for losing his eyesight, right? We have a number of examples of prophets who are blind, or people who are blinded. Anchises, okay, the father of Aeneas, he is able to prophesize once he has his eyesight taken away. And there's a meaning in that. There's the idea that you really see how things are when you're not looking with your eyes. But Saturn, if Saturn represents, okay, if we have seen Saturn as representing tradition, there is actually a 9th house component to Saturn in the sense that it might have to do with organized religion and structure and what is, what is kind of, what is established, okay? Because Saturn deals with things that have kind of been built up over a long time. Saturn doesn't have to do with things that happen quickly. It tends to have to do with this energy of things that are built up over a long time. And Saturn often has to do with patience or about, doing things through, hard work. And, this is the Saturnian energy. Saturnian energy is also often associated with death and reaping and with other things. But typically, if we're talking about Saturn in a global, or if we're talking about it in a political or cultural context, it often has to do with what's established, okay? But there is a side to Saturn that doesn't have anything to do with that at all. And the one thing we're talking about here is the reversal of categories, okay? That is another thing that has come up. We are back, I talk about this in my book, The Roman Empire, that there's a reversal of categories that gets us into this loop. Getting out of the loop is reversing the categories again. So our ideas about things may change. And this idea of Saturn coming in Aries, okay? Aries is the beginning of a new cycle. This is a new Saturn, okay? This is a new Saturn. Would Saturn have some influence on the 11th house too because of Aquarius, since it's also Saturn ruled? Yes, that's a very good point, Kelsey, because yeah, the traditional ruler of Aquarius is currently ruled in the current, when we think about planets out through Pluto, is by Uranus, but yeah, it's Saturn is the traditional ruler of Aquarius, as it is Capricorn, and so yeah, so now you're right. We're talking about the 9th house, the 10th, and the 11th, and the 11th house has to do with social discourse, but it also has to do with our destiny. Okay, it has to do with our where we're headed, what we're trying to manifest. Sometimes it's called the house of hopes and wishes, right? But it's about what are we manifesting. And Aquarian energy, at its best, is humanitarian. it's definitely about, you know, what is compassion for the collective, what is good for humanity as a whole. Although Aquarius energy can also be very detached and very technological, and you know, there's different gradients to it. But Aquarian energy is not necessarily, interestingly, is not always that organized, or it's not organized in the ordinary way. People I know who are Aquarians tend to be they're very talkative, they're very friendly, they have great ideas, but then they may quickly move on to another idea if they don't want to, you know, oh, we'll do that, oh, never mind, let's just move over here. Like, I feel like there's kind of this idea that there needs kind of be almost this organizing principle there. But Saturn, yeah, Saturn also does have to do with Aquarius, which is a good point. I mean, if we've got Pluto in Aquarius right now too, we've got we're talking about an Aquarian age, whenever that's starting. I mean, whether it started already, whether that's something that's going to come in. Yeah, but I think there's also a new Saturn here. We're talking about a new Saturn. We're talking about, and I think this is going to disrupt a lot of the categories that we have. So I think that's why it's saying, don't just try to look at everything through the same script in the same way. Things need to be changed up, okay? And yeah, and that will upset some people. There's some people who are going to look at it like it's an apocalypse or an end time. And oh, that was the other thing that I got in my reading set this morning. I was getting it more with Page of Swords kind of energy. And the Page of Swords to me, like along with the Seven of Swords, has to do with something that's indirect and not direct. So it's not like all of a sudden, like the heavens are going to open, we're going to see this big thing. This is something that's going to kind of work its way into us virally, whatever it is. Alex says, my partner's natal Saturn is in Aries in the 10th. I imagine the upcoming return will be very interesting, a whole new way of life, I think. Wow, yeah. So if you have, yeah, natally, if you have Saturn in Aries, this could be a very interesting time for you. Oh, and I want to mention too, I'm going to do our reading now for the day, but Tuda had emailed me yesterday. We were talking about a guru. There is a Saturn Homa that is taking place on this Saturday. Saturday being Saturn's day. It's also the day of the, interestingly, that she's doing this on the day of a solar eclipse, although I don't know if it's going to be visible in India, so it might not really affect them. But it is the time of a solar eclipse, and there is a Saturn Homa, and I was reading the reason why she was doing this Homa at this time, and because now for them, Saturn is in Pisces, okay? Vedic astrology, things are back by one. But she said, nonetheless, either way, you're still talking about the ending of a cycle. So she says we want to do, and there was actually a whole list of signs and nakshatras that are affected by Saturn. Interestingly, though, the ones that, at least, I don't know all of the Saturn ruled nakshatras. I know mine is Pushya, which is Saturn ruled, but mine's not one of the ones that's affected, which I thought was interesting. Neither my moon sign nor my nakshatra was actually affected by that. So, yeah, there was a link there on the Amma's website that talks about this. And yeah, the fact that there could be a Homa that you could participate in to mitigate the effects of Saturn, it's something, okay, anything that is liberating is going to be disruptive, okay? It's going to be disruptive. It's going to make you think about things differently. And yes, I'd read through the description, and yeah, there's so much impact across many signs. Yeah, exactly. So I was sitting there reading through these things, and you know, it's, you know, there's this whole thing. Same here, yeah. And yeah, so I was kind of like, I'm not affected. Well, I guess that doesn't mean there's going to be no effect, but it's not going to have the most direct effect. And probably you'd have to watch a Vedic astrologer. Like I always think of Camilla Sutton. I don't know if she's going to do any videos on this, but or even consulting a Vedic astrologer to see specifically how this might affect your sign. But actually, maybe I need to do a Saturn class. That might be a good idea. You know, impact of Saturn and Aries on people. You know, I know I've done one for the nodes. I've done one for Pluto and Aquarius. I am going to be doing an Astrology 101 on April the 5th. So maybe I need to try to work in a class where we talk about and Saturn, and you know, before May, because this is not happening until May 26th, right? So, but yeah, there's that. It's almost like we're being prepared. Like, okay, things are going to shift. And right now, I think we're trying to create an expectation. Like, what is this? What is this going to look like? But it is something that is going to, in some way, break down traditional structures. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. You don't want to be caught in the same old way of thinking about things and doing things all the time. And, oh, wow. Okay. Our first 3 cards across are major arcana here. When many people in my sphere are impacted by it, though. Yeah, and we're going to know a lot of people who are impacted. And I don't know. I guess there's just kind of a sense of needing to be patient, because people are going to, even if we feel like we're aware of something, or like we're, you know, again, not trying to look at it directly with the eyes, there's a lot of people who still obviously are going to be doing it that way. And, you know, sometimes when people keep talking about things, saying, but no, but I see this and I see that, it can make us get a little riled up. It can bring in some self-doubt. But ultimately, this is why I think you have to have your own center as your guiding principle here. Like what feels right here? What's, how are you walking down that new path for yourself, whatever that means for you? And how much of the old's going to be incorporated and how much of it has to go, right? So our center card here is, conditioning. We have the devil. We're just talking about that, right? Talking about this kind of stuff. Conditioning, being a lion, being a Solomon, right? Not being in the mass of sheep, being able to stand up and say, wait a minute. Because what this card is about, the devil card in the tarot has to do with attachments. Attachments to ways of thinking. It can be attachment to material things. And I think it could be an attachment to material things in the sense of, like, we're in a Venus retrograde right now, reconsidering what we value. What do we all feel like our purpose is in life? You know, you graduate college or whatever, and then it's like, okay, now I have to job and I have to make as much money as possible, right? We have this attachment to this. Or, oh, you know, I would love to do the thing I want to, but I have to worry about making a lot of money, and that doesn't make a lot of money, right? You know, and that's just one example. And not necessarily everybody feels that way, but it definitely is a consideration. You know, we're looking at, okay, what is it I want? Oh, I want to own a house. I want to have this. I want to have that. Okay, in order to do that, this is what I need to have financially and so forth. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with having those kinds of considerations. I mean, there is a certain amount of practicality and grounding. It's not like we're throwing all our grounding out of the way. In fact, Saturn energy, if it's Capricorn, is certainly, you know, in addition to Aquarius, it's kind of like, it's very grounded kind of an energy. It's the idea that it, you know, yes, it's new ideas, but grounding them in reality, bringing them to reality. So, but in order to do this, you have to break out of conditioning. You can't think about things the same old way. The devil card also has to do with other kinds of attachments that we have. So it's not so much that those things are evil. It's just that we can be so focused on them that we're not able to see the bigger picture. We're just kind of thinking we're among the sheep and that it's all kind of the same, you know, so it's different. The inner feeling of which we are unaware, the world. Completion. Something is done. We keep seeing this, right? Something is done. Something is done. Something is finished. And the external feeling of which we are aware is death, transformation. I mean, look at this, 3 across. Here we have conditioning, breaking out of condition. The cycle is done. Cycle's done. It's time to make the change. And these are major arcana. Okay, this is not. These are things that are happening. You know, if we say no, I don't want to change. I want to be just the same. Well, you know, it's like, I don't know. It's like having a tornado come through and the people are like, evacuate, or a hurricane and saying, evacuate your house. And you're like, no, I'm going to stay right here. And then, of course, when your house gets, you know, flooded or blown away or whatever, you know, maybe you survive, maybe you don't, right? But either way, you're not going to stop the effect of what's coming, right? You know, you're just going to be there. So what are we being asked to do? Here's another ace of pentacles again. Okay, maturity. We got this card yesterday. Maturity. You know, you can make this new start with the experience of the past. There's been a lot coming up about the South Node too, like finishing up karmas, paying off debts, you know, getting ourselves, completing what needs to be completed, right? And this is like, you can make a new beginning with those things finished and with the wisdom of what you've gained. The South Node, we talk about moving from South Node to North Node in Western astrology, but that doesn't mean, oh, South Node bad and throw it all away. It's like, no, you have experience from that. You know, take your experience into this new space, but you don't necessarily want to be thinking about it the same way. You have the maturity to say, you know, to not have to look at things necessarily so literally. It might be like, okay, we've been through this. We know that these are the things that happen. then also it's kind of like, okay, but maybe we haven't tried this, or maybe I need to, the thought experiments I think are good. What would happen if? We're going to look at it in a different way. So what's our outcome card? The 10 of Wands, suppression. So yeah, this is about releasing what is suppressed. Okay, and again, a 10 is an idea of completion. When we look at this card, the Rider-Waite version of this is that the person carrying all of these wands on their back. Not, put the wands down. I mean, we're fired up, we're ready to do something, but it's time to put the wands down, right? It's time to prioritize. What are our priorities? Because I think this suppression is what's making us move away from our humanity, really. We're moving away from our humanity because we are saying that, it's this whole thing of, gee, I'd love to be creative. I'd love to do this. I'd love to, stop and smell the roses. I'd love to participate in things, but I don't have time. I don't have time. I'm too busy. I'm carrying too many things. It's like, so put it down. Put it down. Don't, stop suppressing yourself. Put it down. And Joanne says, I can relate to that. Yeah. There's something you need to put down. And so go with the change. I mean, the change, we also see a lot of cards about play, playfulness, and fun. It's like, hey, maybe this doesn't have to be like a big scary thing. Like maybe this can be fun. We constantly seem to go back to that idea that maybe, and we don't need to take on other people's burdens too, right? We don't necessarily need to be burdened by other people's expectations or how other people tell us how things are supposed to be. And even in something where we're seeing social changes that seem like they're difficult, it's there. Bottom line is, no matter what kind of, no matter what, nobody can make you think something different, and you don't want to give your thinking over to other processes. This is why I say, this is why you don't want to give your creativity up to AI or to other things, just saying, oh, I'll let it do everything for me. I'll let it write for me. I'll let it think for me. I'll let it decide what my thoughts are saying. That made me think of Saturn in Aries as a young Saturn, a youth or a child. Yeah. And that interesting. That's that. Yeah. And you can think about the child archetype in that way. What's the child archetype? It has to do with new possibility. What's possible? What's new? Right. That's what conversation with somebody else about archetypes this past weekend. And it was like, the child archetype is smaller than small, bigger than big. It's the idea that there's this, and in the hero myth, the child is the threat, right? The child is the one who comes in and may potentially unseat the existing ruler, or the existing, you think of Jesus with King Herod, right? The birth of Jesus, goes out and slaughters all the firstborns because he's worried about this, at least that's the story. Or the idea of Perseus as being a threat to his father, who is the king of Argos, and he gets thrown in a chest with his mother and thrown out to sea. But of course, you survive and they move on. But there's always the idea that idea almost has kind of a threat. That's like the beginning of the hero myth. But so yeah, there's the idea of is Saturn coming back as this child in a way to almost challenge the established order? Interesting thought. Anyway, that's enough for me today because we're a little bit over time, and I have a ton of stuff I've got to do today, plus everything I didn't get to yesterday. So thank you guys so much for joining me this morning. Love having all you guys on. Really appreciate you. And yeah, and I will be posting more about classes and other things that I'm doing and the next dream workshop and all that kind of stuff soon. I'll be doing it soon. After I want to get to academics today, and then we'll move on. But thank you so much for joining me. And yeah, and I will be back. Will I be back tomorrow morning? Yeah, I'll be on tomorrow morning. And so I will see you guys then. So have a good day. Thank you. You're great. Oh, you're welcome. And yeah, and hopefully Saturn will probably come up again, but at least we're doing that for now. You guys are welcome and have a fantastic day. Thanks. You are welcome.